Welcome everyone, this is the Mythologies and Role-Playing Games talk, also known in some places as Are You There, Crum? It's me, Conan, because I was very tired when I filled out the program form. It's a 2-hour program slot, which felt like a good idea until I woke up at 3:30 this morning to finish my slides. My name is Jukka Särkijärvi. And just a short initial note on who I am and what are my credentials for giving this talk, and more specifically, what they are not. I have no background in the study of mythology besides one of my textbooks containing Beowulf. Serious study of mythology is usually done in folkloristics, religious studies, anthropology, and history. In literature, you can't really avoid it, but it's more of a case of just being there in the background, like it is in all the stories we tell. What I do have is an expertise in role-playing games. I've co-edited a couple of books on RPGs and a couple more on LARP. And since I have a pack rat nature, I have a ridiculous collection of games. I call it a research library. That makes it tax-deductible. Of course, since there's an even more ridiculous amount of different games out there, half the time this amounts to, yeah, I know there's a game I should check out for this or that thing, but I don't have a copy. And of course, like half of all nerds my age, I basically learned to read on books about mythology. It's a funny thing. The first book I had wasn't anything normal or easily sanitized for kids like Greek or Egyptian or even Norse myth. It was about Aztec mythology. And you know what? It's very hard to clean up a religious tradition that's basically built on frequent human sacrifice. What? No, wait. These are in a weird order. But yeah, first, let's go over some terminology and define some concepts so we're all on the same page on what I'm talking about. Since this is, language, these words have other meanings besides the ones I'm outlining. But these are the senses that I use in this talk. They're off the Merriam-Webster, by the way. A myth is a traditional story, perhaps even a legend, concerning a being, a hero, or an event, with or without a determinable basis of fact or a natural explanation, especially one that is concerned with deities or demigods or explains some practice, rite, or phenomenon in nature. Good examples would be the labors of Hercules, the creation of the world from the shards of a duck egg, Santa Claus, or American founding fathers. Unfortunately, I was unable to find a role-playing game that delved into the American mythology of the founding fathers, since that would have been gold. Alas, I'm stuck waiting for someone to make a Hamilton role-playing game. A mythology, then, is a body of myth, all the myths associated with a certain person like King Arthur, or usually a people like the ancient Greeks or Egyptians. The thing here is that myths are usually very old, there are many versions and interpretations of them, and their authorship is often questionable. Even in the case of the Greek stuff, where we do have author names from 2,500 years ago, the playwrights were likely retelling known myths, and there's a serious disagreement on whether the Homer that the Iliad and Odyssey are attributed to was an actual person. And then there's Pantheon. Familiar from all fantasy role-playing games? Literally from Greek, all the gods. A pantheon with a capital P is a temple in Rome, while with a lowercase p it's the gods of a specific mythology considered as a group, so you have the Greek pantheon, the Norse pantheon, the Hindu pantheon, and so on. And of course, a great many of these stories and gods are also associated with a variety of living religions, from Christianity to various modern heathen traditions. While today I do not intend disrespect towards anyone's personal faith, the body of this talk covers stuff written by other people, who in many cases wrote before the internet made research easy. Also, not to malign anyone's character in general, I suspect a lot of them didn't really care all that much, and there are interpretations of mythological characters here that would make Marvel's Thor look authentic. Now that you know, mythological authenticity is a very relevant thing. These are stories that for the longest time were largely passed down in oral tradition, changing over the years in translation and mistranslation, linguistic drift, political necessity, and the whim of the storyteller. I'm not saying that the capitalist strip mining of indigenous cultural traditions to make a quick buck is a particularly good thing, but it's nothing new under the sun. And sometimes the results are pretty spiffy. Which brings me to the next thing, the structure of this talk. I'll try to keep this funny and light, but there's a lot of stuff to go through. I'll start by a general historical overview and some design points on why would one do such a thing as yoink the gods of ancient Greece for the space opera game. Example from real life. The bulk of this talk, however, will be a look into the different ways that different role-playing games have dipped into the well of real-world myth and legend. From the arguably faithful to the hilariously Hollywood. There should be time at the end for audience questions, but if there's something you absolutely have to ask, feel free to wave your hand around and I may or may not give you the floor. Also, I gotta admit up front, this is gonna be pretty Eurocentric. This is because most of what I know about mythology is the classic stuff like Norse/German, Celtic, Egyptian, Greco-Roman, and a bit about Aztecs and the different Native American myth cycles, and also because that's also what the Anglo-American gaming industry largely knows. Like Thor and Pallas Athena come up a lot more often than Susanoo or Minotaurs or Sung Chang. I've tried to maintain an awareness of this and make note of the rarer mythologies when they show up, but I am but mortal, and so are the game designers. Was that enough preamble? Okay, so obviously modern fantasy genre from which D&D and by extension role-playing games sprung has strong roots in ancient mythologies, to the degree that if you retell most myths in a modern prose novel format, you have your basic fantasy novel. There's loads of examples too, like Robert Silverberg's Gilgamesh the King, Madeline Miller's Circe, and I believe it was Anne McCaffrey who, in the foreword of her Black Horses for the King, noted that every fantasy author ends up writing a King Arthur story sooner or later. And she was only half joking. Myths are also, in a way, the stories, things that discuss the fundamental human experience on a basic level. And once you strip away all the insane bloodshed and wooden horses and world-spanning snakes, there's often something universal at their core. And that, along with the mutability of the form, gives them a degree of endurance. Myths work in other genres as well. Star Wars didn't exactly dip into the matter of mythologies, but George Lucas did use Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces, a book about the universality of the journey or the hero, as a blueprint for his screenplay. And while I know there's a pedant in the audience who wants to make the point that Star Wars is really a fantasy story, that doesn't matter because it's sci-fi in the popular consciousness. Also, behind that wall, they're currently talking about a space opera LARP called Odysseus. It was really cool. Why am I not there? Also, I know none of this is really revelatory. When Tolkien wrote about the Middle-earth, he was consciously writing it up as a mythology because he felt there was no properly English myth cycle. King Arthur being too French and the Celtic stuff, well, Celtic. And while H.P. Lovecraft wasn't consciously working towards a coherent mythology, and really a proper good mythology is kind of messy and contradictory. It coalesced into such and got codified by August Derleth after Lovecraft's death. And that, by the way, is about as much as I'm going to talk about Cthulhu mythos today, since Laura Latto is talking right after me in 201, and Lynn Hardy is discussing it tomorrow, so they got that covered. In general, I'm trying to stick to real-world mythologies because otherwise we'll run over time, and the guy who wants this room after me is talking about historical stabbings. And then we come to D&D, the grandmother of role-playing games. The game that codified the genre fantasy to a degree I am not entirely sure we fully appreciate. Of course, if you look at, say, the Appendix N of the Dungeon Master Guide, which is Gary Gygax's listing of inspiration and recommended reading, it doesn't contain The Plays of Sophocles or Le Morte d'Arthur. It's fantasy novels. There's Tolkien, there's Lovecraft, there's Paul Anderson's 3 Hearts and 3 Lions, and Robert E. Howard's Conan stories, and they all filter this stuff in various measures to Gygax, though I think his Greek stuff he mostly got from Ray Harryhausen movies. It's a funny thing, the Ray Harryhausen movies are probably the only films that in the popular discourse are known for the special effects director. Nobody remembers who actually directed Jason and the Argonauts or Clash of the Titans. If you do, don't tell me. Also, funnily enough, what isn't there in the Appendix N is C.S. Lewis and the Narnia series. And it's funny because it does the same thing that D&D does, and for which Tolkien was pissed at Lewis for, which is pick and mix stuff from different mythological traditions. In Narnia's case, it's primarily Greek and Norse/Germanic myth, and in D&D's case, it's more mix and a lot less pick. But anyway, as a side effect of needing to set things down in rules, D&D codified the creatures of mythology into genre fantasy in a way that bears very slight resemblance to anything going on in the myths. It also brings together things from Norse, Greek, Egyptian, Aztec, Native American, and Japanese myth together in a single world, often the same country, and then makes the same creature in different languages be different things. Like, if you check the Wiktionary translations for ghost, you have a significant chunk of the monster manual right there. And there's also another weird thing D&D did. Since it displaced the mythic creatures from the natural environment, it had to create them a new habitat to exist in. And this is especially notable in the case of many Greek monsters, being usually the singular children of this or that god or titan, like the Chimera, for instance. In Greek myth, there is but a single Chimera. Chimera was the child of the serpentine giant Typhon, and Echidna, who was one of the Gorgons, a sister to the Medusa. And Chimera was a leonine creature, fire-breathing, with a goat's head on her back and a tail that was a serpent, at least according to the Iliad. In Hesiod's Theogony, the snake is replaced by a dragon. And the Chimera is killed by the hero Bellerophon, riding the winged horse Pegasus, either by shooting it with arrows or sticking a lump of lead on a spear into her mouth so that her fire breath melts the lead and kills her. And yes, the Chimera was female. In D&D, of course, the Chimera is a creature with the front body of a lion, the rear quarter of a goat, and the heads of a lion, a horned goat, and a dragon. And because it has to exist in a world where there are more heroes than just Bellerophon to kill strange beasties, it's a species, not a singular monster, so that everybody can have a go. And since it's a species, there are notes on its ecology and preferred habitat, and especially since it's a dragon-like creature, it nowadays comes in all 5 shades of the evil color-coded dragons, but not the metallic hues of the good-aligned dragons, nor the other 50 or so other dragon types. And this rabbit hole goes deep, my friends. Unfortunately, I really tried to find something weird about the Chimera in the D&D books, but none of them had an ecology section that was really properly batshit insane, like some of the other creatures have. Unfortunately, the bullet is not a mythological monster, so I can't talk about that. Ask me in the bar. And hey, that was 1974 to 2019 and counting, really, but you're not Gary Gygax or even Mike Merles, which is a statement I can utter with some confidence, because to my knowledge, this talk isn't being recorded. Well, it is being recorded now. Oh well. So why, in the year of our Lord 2019, would you want to stuff Odin or Zeus or Hercules into your game? Well, first of all, as noted previously, they are instantly, universally recognizable. As a general thing, you don't need to explain Thor, the Jackal or Anubis, Morrigan, Tezcatlipoca or Chernobog maybe, but you know your players. As a rule of thumb, people know the Greek and Norse names better than Roman and German ones, and they can be really convenient shorthands for stuff. Name drop Osiris and you evoke the whole of ancient Egypt with its social structures, politics, religion, geography, and I have politics in here twice, sorry. This can also be used as a twist. Set your game in the tundra where the mammoths roam and the players are harried by were-walruses, and then name drop Osiris and watch your players go, buh? Just remember to have an explanation. In a non-real world myth example, by the way, George R. R. Martin does a good version of this. He doesn't use a real-world myth, but the way he's named the Seven has a similar effect. When a deity is named the Mother or the Warrior, while it doesn't necessarily carry all the cultural weight of Zeus, it is equally self-explanatory. And also they're public domain. So if you want to publish something, you don't need to have a fight with the rights holders. Even for Cthulhu nowadays. Which TSR did. So, time for the examples. And really, I didn't want to cover D&D all that much. Like D&D and Pathfinder are the games I know best, but everybody else knows them as well, and I'd like to cover the other stuff as well. But D&D is the 800-pound gorilla, also in terms of looting mythologies. And it really does have everything but the kitchen sink. Really, I checked, there is no stats for kitchen sinks, even in the Stronghold Builder's Guidebook. And also there is a notable Torilla Tavataan element that I must cover. As already noted, D&D has a weird way with mythological monsters, but it's got that with deities as well. You name it, they got it. Of course, in the spirit of a proper myth, things used to be better and we're now living in an age of decline. I will tell you a story of olden times. In 1980, TSR, for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 1st edition, released a book filled with gods and mythic heroes for the player characters to worship, or more likely to fight. It was written by James M. Ward and Robert J. Kuntz. It was a meticulously written work, with loads of stuff you generally do not see in American role-playing games. Sure, there was a Greek pantheon, and the Celtic pantheon, and the gods of Egypt, and the Aesir, and the Vanir, and even the first appearance of the classic D&D gods like Corellon Larethian and the One-Eyed Groomsh. And most importantly, there was the Finnish pantheon. They have stats for Ukko, a greater god. There are stats for Väinämöinen, and for Ilmarinen, who has a +4 hammer. There's Water Dwarf, the shield man for Ahto, the god of the seas. I read Kalevala a couple of years back, and I'm pretty sure he didn't feature. If someone else knows better, feel free to. Nope.
Wasn't there this? I think it was in the birth story of Väinämöinen that this water dwarf rose from the sea and cut down this mighty tree
I
or
believe it's an
something.
armored short man. It's an
Ah,
armored
yes.
short man that comes from the sea and cuts down the big tree that is covering the sky and, keeping sun away and so on. That is probably what it is referring to. Yeah, it doesn't say dwarf.
So a short armored man came from the sea and chopped down the tree that covered
tree.
world tree that covered the sun. Okay, and now we are all the wiser. The stuff you learn at Ropecon. But yeah, it is gloriously silly. However, in writing the book, James Ward had also called the author Michael Moorcock and the publisher Arkham House for permissions to include the Melnibodean deities and the Cthulhu mythos, respectively. And between their writing and publishing of the book, both Moorcock and Arkham House sold their role-playing game rights to of their respective properties to Chaosium, who didn't get the memo. And then Deities and Demigods was released, Chaosium lawyered up and sent a cease and desist letter to TSR. TSR had the permission, so the managements of the two companies talked like adults, and it was agreed that TSR could continue printing Deities and Demigods with these two pantheons, as long as they included a mention in the book that said, "Special thanks are also given to Chaosium Inc. for permission to use the material found in the Cthulhu mythos and the Melnibodean mythos." However, when the first printing is sold out and time came to reprint, the management at TSR figured that they did not want such a prominent mention of a competitor in their book, so the Cthulhu and Melnibodean mythoi were removed from the second printing. It was later re-released under the name Legend and Lore. In AD&D 2nd edition, they recycled the name for this book in the middle, which is mostly the same, except they cut out the Babylonian, Finnish, Sumerian, and non-human gods, but somewhat expanded the remaining pantheons. Of course, this is an inferior work, for it does not have the water dwarf. And then the title of Deities and Demigods made a reappearance in the 3rd edition, with even fewer pantheons, only Norse, Egyptian, and Greek, plus the D&D gods. But this time with a really complicated system for creating gods for your characters to fight. I do not think it is a very good book. Very important to keep hydrated. But hey, all is not lost. The AD&D setting Forgotten Realms, first released in 1987 and still going strong, kept the Finnish pantheon in D&D. After a fashion. Forgotten Realms' core pantheon is something like 80 gods, and Ed Greenwood had really sticky fingers when he was creating it. So let's activate you kids a bit. Presented here are the symbols of 6 major Forgotten Realms deities from real-world mythologies. Who's this? The oak leaf. Anyone? There. You. Yes, Sylvanus. From Roman myth, a forest god. Same thing in Forgotten Realms. The unicorn head? Come on. Yes, Mielikki, goddess of forests and unicorns and patron of rangers. An ancient Finnish deity. Kinda. So, the shield, it may be a bit difficult to see, but it's got a hammer and scales on top of it. Yes, Tyr, god of law and justice, originally a Norse deity whose bailiwick is actually kind of unclear, but we do know that he sacrificed his hand so that the wolf Fenris could be tied up. And the cat of 9 tails here? Yes, Loviatar, goddess of pain and suffering. Originally a Finnish deity, mythic figure, again, kinda. Loviatar in Finnish myth is often the same as Louhi, though in Kalevala the two are separate. She is basically the mother of disease and everything that can go wrong in childbirth. She is emphatically not the sexy BDSM goddess that D&D makes her out to be. And the tied hands. Yes, this kid is Ilmater, the lawful good god of pain and suffering. They are evil and good deities of pain and suffering. I don't know. Ilmatar in Finnish myth is the mother of the blacksmith Ilmarinen, and has jack shit to do with whoever this guy is. This is a clear case of Ed Greenwood just absconding with a cool sounding name. And the scroll? Come on, room full of nerds. Nope. No, D&D is usually be very hesitant to go into biblical stuff. Yes, Ogma, the god of knowledge and learning. In Celtic myth, he's a great warrior, but then who isn't? And also the inventor of the Ogham runes that were first used to write Gaelic. And of course, Forgotten Realms also contains the Malharandi pantheon, which is actually the Egyptian pantheon. Many versions of the Forgotten Realms timeline actually begin. The first entry is the Orc Gate Wars, when the Malharandi pantheon shows up in the Forgotten Realms, and the orcs show up, and then Grumsh kills the god Ra in the first known deicide. It is gloriously silly. I love it. And there's more. There's always more in D&D. In D&D, more is more. This book here is On Hallowed Ground. It's for the Planescape campaign setting, whose core concept is that it happens in the outer planes, which are made out of the belief of mortals in the material plane. The outer planes are where the gods dwell. All of them. Like, seriously, all of them. This was just the excuse they were looking for to write a book taking every damn real-world pantheon and mangling them beyond recognition. The Finnish pantheon also makes a return here, and we learned that Väinämöinen is a level 20 paladin and a level 23 bard. And Kullervo is chaotic neutral with evil tendencies. Oh, and Ilmatar and the Ilmater Forgotten Realms are different after all. Here we also get the Indian pantheon, which is the first time that a major world religion shows up in one of these. And also, if I remember correctly, Johanna there in the back row in a column years ago described this book, reading this book, as having an inkling of what the Norwegians feel when they see Americans mangle their mythology. Oh yeah, and there's the greater god of darkness, Hisi, whose domain is a cave that roams around on prime material plane. Makes no goddamn sense. Oh yeah, the Hindu pantheon here is the first time for the major world religion, unless you count the one time they statted out Satan as a Duke of Hell in the Dragon magazine in the 1980s. True story, look it up. It's written by Ed Greenwood. So this ugly guy here is the demon god Koshchacha, named after Koshchei the Deathless from Slavic myth. He can serve as our example demon lord, many of whom are from mythology or medieval occult texts like the Lesser Key of Solomon, and none of whom have anything to do with the original source. And finally, I want to mention the historical sourcebook series for AD&D. They released a bunch of these green-covered books in late second edition for playing historical fantasy in different eras, and they're actually mostly pretty good for that. And now I could go on about D&D till the cows come home. It's done everything at some point. But there are other games out there. like also D&D, but it's unofficial, so it maybe doesn't count. Well, anyway, the Mazes and Monsters it's a really fascinating experiment. It's one of the old school, one of the games that came out of the old school Renaissance. So it runs on one of the 70s, 80s basic D&D rule sets. I do not honestly remember which, and I forgot to check which one. And it is, to my knowledge, the world's only speculative role-playing game. It's a what-if thought experiment on what D&D would have looked like if it had been based on Greek mythology rather than Robert E. Howard's pulp and Tolkien's high fantasy. So you have character classes like the Amazon and the Centaur, and of course Minotaurs. It's a free download. And now let's take a short look at some good old-fashioned blasphemy. The French RPG, In Nomine Satanis, Magna Veritas, is a role-playing game that satirizes religion. In it, you play an angel or a demon fighting for good or evil, and it's, by my understanding, rather like a superhero game. The system runs on what the designers called the D666. And to explain my awful joke here, it's published in English by Steve Jackson Games, except their version bears a similar relationship to the original as Cheese Whiz bears to Camembert. Except no substitutes. Unless it's the Polish version, which was pulled from distribution apparently due to blasphemous content. So that's a collector's item. There's a French friend of mine who's really angry about this. And for a change, something unironically good. This is my go-to example for a game that takes its mythic setting seriously, and it creates a synthesis of the myth cycle that inspired it. Pendragon explains why choices were made, what the original sources were, from the French to the Welsh to the English, and how to run it in the right style. It's a fairly old game, and it was originally designed by the late Greg Stafford, but it's still in print, currently from a company called Nocturnal, I think. The current edition, the one here depicted, is 5.2. The game has a system of knightly vices and virtues, and the characters' values in these stats, they subtly affect the actions they can take and how they can take them. It doesn't remove control from the player, and it more like gives gentle nudges, like a proactive alignment system. And it's also got my absolute favorite campaign book of all time. The Great Pendragon Campaign, which takes the characters year by year through the entire legendarium, from the reign of King Uther Pendragon to the Battle of Camlan and the bitter end. There's a hand.
I have seen many games of that campaign played, and it never goes according to the campaign rule books.
Yes. No plan survives contact with the enemy. And these characters are expected to die, and their descendants to pick up the adventure, and the players can expect to go through 3 or 4 characters at least, since it lasts, 80 years. To me, this is the war and peace of role-playing game campaigns. It's also my white whale, since there's no way I can keep a group together long enough to finish all of those 84 years, I think. But it is brilliant, and I love to read it and dream what it would be like to run it. Actually, I saw online this one campaign log of a guy who did actually manage to run this from beginning to the end. And this was accomplished by running it with only one player, to whom he was married. Desperate measures, but it was worth it. My slides seem to be out of order. Oh well. Anyway, In Nomine Satanis is not the only game to have gone straight to the Bible for inspiration. Like everyone probably knows this, but I'd be remiss if I did not mention Vampire the Masquerade, whose origin myth for vampires is that God cursed Cain, the first murderer, into an eternal unlife. And then there's the other guy here. That's Green Ronin Publishing's Testament, one of their Mythic Vistas series. They have other books in the series as well for Trojan War and I think Imperial Rome and stuff. But this is the funky one. This is heroic D&D fantasy in the world of the Old Testament. It's been a very long time since I read it, but I think it may have actually had stats for the jawbone of the ass that Simpson used to kill the whoever's. And there's some local stuff. In 1993 and 1995, Pasi Silander and Pia Makkonen wrote 2 games for a pair of institutions affiliated with the church. Kuninkaiden Aika, The Age of Kings, is a tabletop role-playing game. Anno Domini 50, more of a LARP text. They're both intended to be played as a religious education, and they were written to be light and approachable for a young audience. This is very much stuff in the vein of the youth pastor with a guitar, if you get my meaning. They're also noteworthy from a historical viewpoint because Pia Makkonen is the first published Finnish female tabletop role-playing game designer. As of 6 o'clock today, that number's been 3, by the way, which is embarrassing. Anyone heard of this? Yeah. Yeah. Hellas is it's a space opera game about, well, it's fucking Greeks in space. It's ancient Greeks in space. It's mythological ancient Greeks in space with heroes infused by powers from the gods. It's entirely unabashed about the bullshit that it's pulling. And they, I think, recently took a new printing of the core book. It should be available. Unfortunately, I know very little about it beyond that. And then we have Scion, a White Wolf game from 2007. The second edition, I think, just came out. In Scion, you play characters who are descendants of gods, much in the vein of Hercules or Perseus of Greek myth. It's urban fantasy set in the modern day, and it has the characters able to pick their divine parent from the usual suspects. There's Greeks, there's Norse, there's Egyptians, and one of the source books did something unusual and added the voodoo loas to the list. The game line was pretty limited in size, and the idea was that the characters would slowly gain in power until reaching true godhood. and taking on the titans themselves. The system's got its issues, and I'm honestly not sure if I've ever seen a mechanically heavy system that's actually done a satisfactory job of modeling a power scale from mortal hero to god. But there's a certain exuberance to Scion that makes me like it. Wait, no. What did I do? And for most things, GURPS delivers. Though not as majorly as might be expected. Like the games, these history and culture sourcebooks, they come with obligatory short bits on local mythology and gods, but only Celtic myth, Camelot, and Robin Hood are really they really focus it primarily on that stuff. Before getting any of these, perusing the reviews is also recommended, since I've been getting really mixed signals on some of these, and personally I don't have the understanding or background to trivially evaluate something like GURPS China myself. Here's some more local produce. Villervuotslainen's Roudan maa, or the Land of Frost, which is a mistranslation, but English doesn't really have a satisfactory word for Routa. There's 2 editions of this. The first one, the one with the light cover, is a general sourcebook for Iron Age Finnish fantasy role-playing, while the second one is an actual fully-fledged role-playing game with the rules and everything. They are very good. Unfortunately, not available in English. He hasn't yet contracted me to translate them. I've done fucked up. Now, this is embarrassing. Well, this has been a scratch on the surface. I hope I provided a wide enough look into the different ways the mythologies have been and can be used and abused in the field of role-playing games, and may be giving you some ideas of what to look for and what to stay away from. Myths are durable. They can stand being reimagined, rewritten, adapted, or launched into space, while retaining the core qualities that are independent of tech levels or whether there are elves. There are several games I failed to acquire for study, such as the Italian Kalevala, of which I only know that it exists. I have very little idea what's really going on outside Finnish and English language areas, especially Japan and Russia. There's an upcoming Mexican role-playing game called Nahual, which didn't quite make it in time. And I have now screwed up royally, and I'm out of slides and out of games. But you now have gloriously time to ask me questions. Or, not. Yes, they're in the front row, with the skull thing.
Actually, what's the most game or piece of media that has the most royally screwed some of the mythology you like?
So, the thing that's mostly screwed up a mythology that I like, I'd have to say it's D&D's weird-ass interpretations of, most mythologies that it's touched, especially the Finnish ones.
I must agree.
Anyone else? Ellie there. The most abused mythology of all, that would be the Norse. The Norse mythology is usually the go-to thing when Americans want to, or sometimes the English want to dabble in mythology, and then it results in weird interpretations and stuff like. Actually, one game that I didn't cover, Rune, which is this sort of Viking fantasy thing where the players and the game master are placed in adversarial positions, and the game master has these points to build a challenging dungeon adventure thingy, and the players must face off against that. Yeah, also, in the program description, I asked the question of what is the most popular god in all of role-playingdom, and that would be Thor. It's not a very interesting answer, I'm sorry. Sampo there in the back.
Speaking of mythology, there's also a Mythology by Mark Eagerness. The mythic fantasy role-playing game, which is atrocious. Also, I think it's at least partially typeset in papyrus, so you know it's good.
Yes, the back row has reminded us of the existence of Mythologies, or My Fantasy Role-Playing Game, or Mythic Fantasy Role-Playing Game, however you want to interpret that title, by Varg Vikernes, the noted Norwegian musician, church burner, and murderer. I haven't read the book in its entirety. I haven't been able to lay my hands on it since there is no PDF download, and I'm fucked if I'm ever giving that guy money. But what I've seen of it, it finds ways to fail at being a role-playing game that I would not have thought possible. It is innovative in its terribleness, and yes, it is laid out in papyrus.
Obvious question, can you give us examples of those failures?
There's this chart that's been making the rounds on the internet there about situational and conditional modifiers for swimming in water. And it's something like 20 lines long. So, small waves, slightly bigger waves, medium waves, large waves. Is it cold? Is it lukewarm? Is there wind? It reads like a role master designed by someone who doesn't know mathematics. But yeah, you had a question.
Have you found any examples of mythologies done well in a game that doesn't specifically focus on that mythology?
Well, some of the GURPS things, they don't really have the room to screw it up. I don't know. I cannot answer that off the top of my head. There was a question of somewhere. Okay.
Are there any games that take into account the cyclic nature of many of the myths, like the Greek ages or the Ragnarok or such?
I think Scion intimated in that direction, though I never read that book. And I want to say that there is some sort of Forging story game that does that, but I cannot remember which one it was.
any examples where the concept makes you think, oh, this must be this guy, but the name or the appearance or something like that has changed?
Yeah, a lot of fantasy, especially D&D fantasy gods, are basically mythological, real-world mythological deities with the name replaced. I'm trying to come up with an example off the top of my head. Nope, sorry, I've been awake since 3:30. Ellie?
So now you have time to tell us about the thing we were supposed to ask you about at the bar. The thing that was not in the original, whatever it's called.
It was the ecology of the roulette.
Yeah, that was my question.
The ecology of the boulette. For those of you who don't know, the boulette or boulet, however you want to pronounce it, is the D&D's fabled land shark, based on not on mythology, but on a plastic toy that Gary Gygax bought for a dime in a drugstore. The same bag contains the origins of the owlbear and the rust monster. The boulet is this huge monster which basically swims underground and comes up and eats you. And in the Forgotten Realms source boxed set Elminster's Ecologies, there is a description of the ecology of the boulet, or bullet, however, whatever, where if I remember correctly, it starts off. It describes how everything in it about it is disgusting, from the way it breathes, which is wheezing in and grunting out. The way it feeds, often falling asleep in the middle of the meal with the prey still half inside its mouth and alive. And nothing was worse than the way it breeds, which was by, I think, digging a hole, lining it with corpses, and then laying eggs once mate has been attracted. That box set was full of this crap. It's brilliant. It's debatably useful for role-playing games, but it's fun.
Could you talk like also religion into like horror games, like cult or something like that?
Excuse me?
Can you talk anything like a cult, like a horror recent game?
I haven't read Cult entirely. Did it actually go into real-world mythology, or did it just operate on its own weird-ass, nihilistic, made-up...
Kind of, but it has some kind of Christian or, I mean, Abrahamic, semi-mystery, ancient, something like that. I didn't read it anywhere back.
Yeah, it's a very difficult book to get through. It's very dry, though. The art and layout are beautiful. It's actually the current book in the role-playing game reading club on Facebook. You want to keep doing this?
Thank you. This was enjoyable.
Oh, good. Thanks for coming here. I also have a talk tomorrow. For that, we do have a full set of slides. And I have a talk on Sunday morning, for which I'm not responsible for the slides.